Welcome back to the channel. Thank y'all for hanging with me. On this Monday, little Carolina rig fish. So what we got here, a little over 2 pounds, is beginning of April. We got 65-degree water temp, and we're out in 8 feet of water. And there's some fish that should be spawning. It's April and it's 65-degree water temp. I'll grab another baby brush hog out of here real quick. I just want to find some of these flatter banks that have lots of surface area where a bass could spawn. You know, they're not all going to spawn right on the bank, especially on these lakes that have a little bit clearer water. So if you can find some, I'm not catching any that are like right under the boat, so I'm sitting in 8 feet. A lot of them are going to be spawning out in 5. I think a lot of times that's where those bigger fish are going to spawn, and you're going to get a mix of pre-spawns and post-spawns hanging around these spots too, because they're just good hard spots, good places for them to feed. And on lakes that have a lot of bait, they don't always have to be on a hump or something like that. This is kind of just a little drain. They're hanging around these points. And most of them are probably either spawning or about to spawn. So it's a really effective way to catch fish that are spawning. And then those ones that aren't ready, they're hanging around a little deeper. I'm also covering that zone. So, you know, you're probably thinking, why not a Texas rig? Carolina rig gets to the bottom a lot faster. You can cover more water because you're keeping that bait on the bottom. So instead of a Texas rig where you got to fish it real slow to keep it near the bottom, I can keep that 3/4 ounce weight on the bottom, especially in this shallower water, and move this bait a lot faster without having to let it sink back down to the bottom. Now, if I was shallower and I was just fishing that 5 to 2 foot range, Texas rig, even a weightless Senko or something like that would be a better option in my opinion. But since I'm covering a lot of this 5 to 6 to even 7 foot range, this is just a lot more effective out in that depth range. And I really don't know where these fish are at. So I'm fishing a couple little points, a couple little drains. All of it is hard bottom. Bass could be anywhere. And I'm moving quite a bit. So I don't really have any big concentration of fish. And it's still kind of early in the spawn. You know, this is probably the very beginning of the spawn. So there's not like any big wave concentrated in one little area. They're kind of just all over the place. So this, I feel like, is my best shot at catching a really big one right now, for the fact that it's probably unpressured and it's not going to be spawning in 2 feet of water. It's going to be out here in 5, 6 feet of water. So, and this is going to give you a really good idea when fish start to transition to post spawn in summer. If you put a bait like a Carolina rig in your hand, you're just going to have a lot better feel for the lake. As much as I like to just go shallow and crank and chatterbait and swim jig, when those fish get done doing that, and it's going to be one day you're up there crushing them on a swim jig, and the next day all you can do is catch 2-pounders, you don't really have any idea what's in this mid-range. So you do have to spend some time, especially in the month of April, out here in the mid-range, or you're going to be so lost when those fish leave shallow. You're not going to have any idea where they're at, what they're doing. One day you're just going to be up there fishing on the bank and you're not going to catch any more size. It's all going to be out. It's all going to leave. Carolina rig is such an effective tool in all depth ranges for covering water and getting bites when they just won't hit a moving bait. Little fun fact about a Carolina rig. The most winningest, we'll just use minor league baseball, double A, you have single A, double A, triple A, and professional in baseball. If we were just to say double A fishing competitions, the winningest guy, this is all he does is throw a Carolina rig. So that's a little fun fact on how powerful a tool this is. And I feel like I have a pretty good grasp on this lake February, March, when the fish want to get shallow. But when they start to push off the bank, start to go towards the main river channel, a bait like this is going to tell you so much that all those shallow baits just don't. Just one day you're catching them on those baits, and then you're completely lost. So spending some time out here, not just fishing the places and the targets and everything that you fish, the early spring, early pre-spawn time, to get out here where these fish are heading the end of April, beginning of May. And I'm not saying just go pick up a Carolina rig and just go throw it anywhere. Go throw it right out in front of where you usually catch fish spawning. They're not all going to be right smack dab in front of where you catch them spawning. But if you spend some time and fish around, it's going to teach you a lot about the migration of the fish as they start to move towards their summer pattern, which we're 2 months away, but this is a great in-between. There's a lot of baits that'll work that you really haven't been fishing a whole lot earlier in the year. Your medium diving, deep diving crankbaits. And those will all start to work in the next month or so. This is a great time to be fishing for fish that are in the mid-range, pre's and posts, and then also they are spawning too, because you'll catch some of those. If you have clear enough water, those fish have no problem spawning out in 6 feet of water. And if you have a lake, clear enough water, lots of fishing pressure, most of the big ones don't spawn shallower than 4 or 5 feet. They don't spawn where you can see them for the most part. Or you would see them everywhere. You can just feel so much on the bottom with this that you can't really with the Texas rig. Find these little rock piles, gravel piles, little shell beds, and end of springtime fishing, that's what bass want to get on. They want to get on these little itty bitty spots, these little shell beds that are the size of the front deck of the boat. And it can be boring, it can be painful, but as a guy that likes to fish shallow year round, you're setting yourself up for a lot of confusion once you get into May and June and you just don't have any more places where the fish want to be, and they've all moved out just a little deeper. I'm not saying they all go out into 20 feet of water, but when they get out in that 7, 8, they're no longer in that 3 to 5. You got to come out here and start looking for some of these places, because the fishing's still good. You know, there's still fish that want to bite. Oh. Just hanging on to the back of it. Have my legs. Probably a bluegill, maybe a little bass, maybe a spawner. It's that time of year where everything's biting a baby brush hog. But real quick on my setup here, I like 2 3/8. I'm not fishing around any big rock. You know, most of this is just pea gravel. So I like tungsten if I was fishing around big rocks where those weights would be getting stuck. I like lead. It's a little softer, comes through those rocks. You can kind of pull on it and it's going to smash that lead down, and then most of the time you're going to be able to get your rig back. I'm just fishing little gravel bars and stuff like that, so I like 2 3/8 tungstens. One the right way, one the wrong way. That little tungsten stopper, Carolina rig leader, from the middle of your chest or your chest out to the ends of your fingers, and then a small offset round bend worm hook. This is a 3/0. You don't want a lot of hook. That fits that baby brush hog perfectly, but the whole key is not a lot of hook. Your bait's not going to come off the bottom a whole lot, but the more hook you put in it, the more it's going to be down on the bottom. You want it to come off the bottom as much as it can. Ooh. I'm a little rusty. I've only caught a few this year on a Carolina rig. I'm having a lot of trouble figuring out what a bite is, what a bass bite is. I caught a couple at Wheeler on it, and I've caught a couple today on it. We'll keep, you know, one other thing I will say, being a guy that fishes grass most of the time, bass aren't gonna always be in the grass. You know, I've come from the Kissimmee chain, where there's a time of year where grass just isn't the deal. They get on other stuff. They're in the lily pads. They're not always using the hydrilla. You know, it's not always the best bite. Same thing with this lake. There's times a year where they're just not in the grass. And that's hard to believe because this whole lake is full of grass. So you think, like, how is that even possible? Grass is everywhere. But for whatever reason, if it's a post spawn thing, they want to get on a hard place, that's not always in the grass. So as much as you think you can just come to a lake that has a bunch of hydrilla, milfoil, eelgrass, and just always stay in the grass, and you go and do it for a couple of days and you're not catching them, they're just not in the grass good. Or you come to a lake that has a lot of fish in it and you wind something around like a chatterbait or crankbait for a couple of days. It's not a cranking deal. It's not a moving bait deal. It's a dragging deal. So keeping a bait like this honest, you can be the best shallow water fisherman in the world, but if they're not doing that, spending just a little bit of time, and this typically happens in April, where the fishing just gets a little bit different. Some of them are spawning. Most of them have seen a lot of baits. There's less and less of those good pre-spawn type places. You got to get the boat out a little bit deeper and start looking for fish that are relating to the deeper water. And it doesn't take much. You know, it's not that complicated. Fish out in front of where you know some fish live, cover a bunch of water. So they're typically not going to be on any obvious places. Or at least the first place you would think. They're not going to always be there. You got to kind of cover some water. You know, something I run into a lot as a shallow water fisherman is that you can spend 3 days looking for good shallow water, and you'll eventually figure out that the couple places that you did find, there's just not enough of that. You know, you're spending too much time running around the lake trying to find more of that. You're spreading yourself out so much that there's times where you just can't do everything shallow. You know, those guys that run way in the back of places where no one else fishes, they're doing that because that's where they have to go to just fish their whole day shallow. If you're out here where everyone fishes, there's not enough shallow stuff going on where you can just focus on shallow. Now, you can catch a bunch of fish shallow, but you might not have an opportunity at anything over 5 pounds on more than 1 or 2 stretches. So that's where this mid-range thing becomes super important. This 5 to 10 foot range. So if you want to just look for shallow fish, you got some lily pads over there, and you got to run 3 miles up the lake to find some more lily pads. You know, just a specific pattern you're running, you're going to spend too much time doing that. If you can mix in 1 or 2 bites on this Carolina rig in this mid-range stuff close to your shallow fish, where you're going and swimming a jig or doing something like that, that's crucial this time of year. February, March, you can kind of put all your eggs in the shallow basket. There's times in the summer where you can put all your eggs in the basket, but when you have fish that are in a major transition, pre-spawn, spawn, post-spawn, and there's a pretty hefty mix in each one of those phases, you can't just fish for one. You'll spread yourself out too far on the lake. There's nothing wrong with fishing shallow all year round. I do it, but you're making it really hard on yourself specific times of the year. And when the shallow bite isn't amazing everywhere, that's usually a pretty good sign that there's something better going on in a different depth range. And again, I'm not saying you got to go out in 20 feet of water. You just got to get a little bit deeper than you're fishing and at least look. If you come out here and spend a few hours doing this and you can't get bit and you fish a couple different places and you know you're in areas where fish want to live, then maybe the lake is just off and maybe everywhere is bad. You know, maybe the deep bite, the mid-range, the shallow bite, it's all bad. Then you want to just focus the rest of your time shallow. That's okay. But a lot of times it doesn't take long for you to get out in just a little bit different depth range and then figure out, okay, most of them are out here. Mixing this in with my shallow game is the deal. And one, they're not going to stay the same. One's usually getting better and one's usually getting worse. So to have a couple different options is really important. And maybe the shallow bite's going to get better and you don't have to do this. But the other way around, like I've said 5 times in this video, you'll just be lost. You'll have no idea where they went. You know, and there's times of the year like fall turnover where fish don't have an option but to get really shallow. There's times when the early spring where they make a push and the easiest ones to catch are really shallow, and fishing's really fun if that's what you like to do. You like to fish shallow. But when you know the lake is changing, you know the fish can't stay in pre-spawn much longer. You know, nature's telling you that fish want to spawn. Moon phase is right, water temp is right. The lake's covered in pollen, you know, all these trees are blooming, everything's, spring's coming to life. You're seeing shad flicker on the surface of the water everywhere. Catching big old spotted bass. It's not a big one, but for me, it's a big one. It's a close to 2 pound spot. All right, guys. Well, we're getting some bites doing this. Carolina rig. It's at least telling me that there's some new options if I want to get off the bank, fish out a little bit deeper. So Carolina rig, huge tool in the month of April. Once fish start getting into transition, they could be coming, going, but you know some fish on your lake are spawning. Try this. It takes just a couple bites. We've all thrown it to get your confidence back. Just a couple fish. This is a big fish bait. It's a highly successful bait in tournament fishing. Slow moving on the bottom. You can't beat it, especially on a day where you have a lot of sunshine. Try that, guys. Good luck to you, and I'll see you on the water.